after. Wait for it. So we need to do it a slow way this time.
Yeah.
One click at a time.
Okay.
Press wait.
Pay unresponsive.
Press that wait button.
Okay.
A bit laggy this morning.
Yeah.
There we are.
Oh, good.
That's a good one.
We're live. We have to do without the niceties this morning, I'm afraid. It's an old trumpet, but any old mortal story gets all right. Well, it is good morning, chaps. If it's a bit rough around the edges this morning, it's because, as I explained to you yesterday, our wonderful little computer, our workhorse that has been looking after us for several years, decided that he'd had enough and gave up the ghost. So we have this one, which is just about coming out of retirement with some resentment, but it's getting us through, and we've got a perfect picture of you, both of you, and I'm sure that it will last us for the length of our chat this morning. So here's Bethany looking at you. Here are your viewers looking at you, and
can't hear you.
There we are.
there we are. Everything is happening in slow motion.
That was the video that was meant to be playing like 2 minutes ago, but that's not the point.
So anyway, away you go, chaps.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning. Good morning, Philip. Good morning, Beth. Everybody.
Can you hear all right?
I can hear you, yes. I hope you can hear me.
I think that's his voice.
Okay. We're going to have to listen to you very carefully. The sound isn't that
Press that same button.
Philip, do you want to say something just to see how your sound is?
Yes.
Okay. We should be all right. So where we go.
Lovely. Philip, I thought today that we could talk about something topical.
Okay.
And as we know, King Charles has spent a few days on a charm offensive with the French, which has included the Queen playing ping pong. Now, I'm not quite sure what Elizabeth II would have made of that, but I don't think she would have been playing ping pong. But I think it's an interesting topic, the relationship between what was originally the English, now the British, and the French. And it for most of its existence, it's been a very fraught relationship, hasn't it, Philip?
Well, it has. The genesis of the fraughtness, of course, is that England, as you rightly say then in the day, owned about a third of France. Certainly the vast majority of Aquitaine and some more. Mary Tudor said that she would die with the name Calais written on her heart because, of course, they lost Calais.
Yes.
And a lot of blood was shed by French and Englishmen over the possessiveness by the English of that part of France. And of course, we have the famous English victories of Agincourt and Cressy.
Yep.
That's the reverse order. Cressy came first.
It did.
And then we had a French victory, and they've named a whole village after it. And it's near where I used to work in France, called Castillon-la-Bataille. It was a very minor victory, but the French took it very seriously. And therefore, the village is known even now as Castillon-la-Bataille. Then, of course, came Napoleon.
Well, I was going to let me just go back a stage. I suppose if this were a pub fight equivalent, where we were doing a trial of who started this, I suppose we could legitimately argue that it was the Normans who lived at the time in France who started it with William the Conqueror's invasion of this country.
Correct. The Normans, of course, weren't genetically French.
No, I know. They came from sort of Scandinavia, didn't they?
Yeah, they were of Viking stock. And the whole business stemmed from William usurping Harold's genuine right to the throne.
Yeah.
And it's referred to in the play Henry V. It's called the something law, the Cyric. It's a word like Cyric or Senlac law that Henry V relies on to invade France, and hence Agincourt. But I mean, long after that, relations were never good. There were trade wars, naval battles, piracy. The film Master and Commander with whatever his name is, the gladiator chap, Russell Crowe. Master and Commander is based on the British Navy tracking down a French pirate ship called the Acheron, as in the underworld river. Good film, actually. And then, of course, came Napoleon.
Dear old Boney. Now, you know, that must have been a frightening time.
Hugely. But I mean, we think Ukraine is scary, and it could become more so, I suppose. But Napoleon, rather like Hitler, was the entire source of a pan-European war.
Yeah, but was also clearly intent, if he was able to invade England.
Yes. Well, he prepared. He made preparations for that.
And Sussex would have been one of the areas that would have had to suffer that more than others.
Yes, just as it did with William the Conk. Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, the rivalry was worsened over in Canada. As Keith will know, Quebec and that area. I mean, Quebec is still basically French. And I'm trying to remember the name of the British admiral who won a very famous victory over there. It wasn't Clive, that was India. Doesn't matter. But yeah, so we were fighting them everywhere.
And over centuries.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So this charm offensive, as you put it, of course, delayed by, ironically, the riots in France, because they don't mess around over there. They don't just down tools, they burn everything.
And they pick up the cobbles from the streets and throw them, yeah.
No, absolutely. Liberté, fraternité, égalité, and all that. But yesterday, as I understand it, I'm a bit loath to talk about this because I'm very, very anti-royalist, I'm afraid. But but Charles addressed both houses of their parliament, including a passage in French, which must have sounded very interesting. And today, they are going down to Bordeaux.
Yes.
Which interests me for two reasons. One, it's very near where I worked in France, picking grapes in the early 80s in a town called Libourne, which is southeast of Bordeaux. But Bordeaux was the second worst affected French city after Paris by their riots.
Yes.
In fact, they tried to burn down Bordeaux's Hotel de Ville, the town hall.
I suppose what happened is that there was a sort of a relatively limited alliance during the middle of the 19th century. We fought together in the war against Russia at Crimea. And it was the Frenchman who said, "C'est magnifique, mais ce n'est pas la guerre," meaning of the charge of the Light Brigade, it's magnificent, but it's not actually war.
Well, it was a suicide trip. What happened apparently was that there was such a confusion in the orders that they went down the wrong valley. They were meant to go at a parallel valley where there were no guns facing them. But the message got garbled and they went down like ninepins, sadly, against the Turks.
Yes, and the notorious Lord Lucan, who left his car at the top of Beachy Head after his alleged killing in his home. It was one of his ancestors who was part of that cock-up.
That I didn't know. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, but our ententes with the French were always very, very uncomfortable. It wasn't until the early 20th century.
1904.
Yeah, the Entente Cordiale. Yeah. That was the first diplomatic attempt to improve things.
Yeah, formally. So in fact, you're talking about their almost 900 years of conflict between the two countries. But dare I say it, the French got it just in time because it meant that we backed them in both the First and the Second World Wars.
Well, yeah, back them, yes. First World War, well, first of all, France, sadly, because it is a beautiful country, France has always been the battleground.
Yes.
So
that's just a result of geography, isn't it?
It is.
It's there in the middle.
It is. And the wish of every dictator or warmonger like Kaiser Wilhelm in the First War, and then dear old Adolf in the Second, they want to get across France, occupy it, and get to the coast. Because that's what Wilhelm wanted to do, and that's why he went through Belgium.
Yeah.
He outflanked the French because they had all the forts at Verdun and all that business. And he outflanked them. And they damn near got to Paris.
Yeah.
It was, ironically, in its day, because of the lack of technology that was available to Hitler, it was actually a better maneuver than the original Blitzkrieg, because it just was so modern and effective. And then, of course, everything ground literally to a halt, and we had 4 years of trench warfare.
And then in the Second World War, there was a much more successful occupation of France by Adolf, and the French split over that. And there was the Vichy state that was, if in the south of France, that was effectively the pro-fascist state.
The irony is, the hero of Verdun, Marshal Pétain, became the traitor of France because he negotiated the Vichy arrangement, whereby the lower half of France was hardly occupied by Germany, but was run as a puppet German fascist nation by people mirroring what the Nazis did. So that was what Pétain did. And rather like with the Spanish Civil War, it caused divisions that are politically and family-wise still there today.
Oh, completely. Yes, in France, there's no doubt about that. But then, of course, ultimately, Adolf and his cohorts were defeated. And we, the British, had supported the French resistance and had given a place for Charles de Gaulle to operate from in this country. And then it might be thought that in that grand tradition of the British and the French not getting on, he did the dirty on us.
Yeah, de Gaulle was arguably the most arrogant and ungrateful man France has ever produced. And
that's saying something.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
If you think of Valéry Giscard and the other French presidents that I'm struggling to remember the names of, but yes. As you say, Britain hosted the Free French government. De Gaulle was allowed to broadcast from London, but he literally hated the British. He simply hated us.
And vetoed us from joining Europe.
What was then the common market, he stood in our way time and time again. He was allowed to enter Paris at the head of the liberating armies. But he was a divisive figure in France as well.
Yes.
He by far was not representative of the French people, who generally, the further you go from Paris, rather like in America, the further you go from Washington and New York, they hate the central government. And de Gaulle became very, very unpopular. I think it was him who said, how can you govern a country that produces 92 cheeses? Somebody said that. I think it was de Gaulle. So yes, relations returned to their frigid selves. We didn't go to war with them. I don't think we helped the French by choice. We had to do it. We had to try and stop the Kaiser. We had to try and stop. Well, firstly, the Kaiser went through Belgium. That was meant to be a neutral nation.
And we always supported the Belgians and said that.
There was a treaty. We were dragged in.
Any violation of their borders, and we would be obliged to join in.
Correct. Any breach of their neutrality. And then the Second World War, well, everybody had to put everything in to stop him.
Yeah.
So I've never seen it as any great sympathy for the French. And in fact, the British in the Second War rather despised them. And they made jokes about how quickly they surrendered. And a bit like the Italians, you know, how many gears does an Italian tank have? 1 forward and 4 reverse. You know, that type of joke.
Philip, you've told us that you worked in France for a while.
Yes, I worked in the early 80s. I spent three autumns, thanks to a friend of mine I was at university with, who now lives and produces wine in France. But through him and his contacts, I worked on a chateau in, as I said, the town of Libourne, based at a chateau called Chateau Patrice, Patris, and I picked grapes for 3 years.
Philip, why does it not come as a surprise to me that for 3 autumns you went to a place that created wine? I don't know, you know, just call me old-fashioned.
I agree. It is pretty surprising, isn't it, that I, who loathe red wine, as you know, found myself in that situation. The thing was, it was barking out there because you could drink through the day. They would bring these huge plastic canisters of very good wine. I mean, this was top quality Merlot. So I worked with mainly French people, but met other nationalities as well over those 3 years. And then in the final year, we were taken down, which was a huge privilege. The family who managed the place, the Renards, the Foxes, they took me and my friend Pat down to where they holidayed, a place right down the south west on the border with Spain called Saint-Jean-de-Luz, south of Bayonne and Biarritz. So no, I saw a great deal of France thanks to them. And they were working people. I had no contact with the middle classes, the bourgeoisie, at all.
Well, what I wanted to ask you, Philip, is so we're talking now about 30 odd years ago?
Yeah, 1980 to 83.
I was wondering how, because we've been talking about the conflicts between the British and the French, I was wondering how you found it being an Englishman there, whether that was something that you suffered from the French.
Au contraire. I was delighted. I was made very welcome, genuinely, particularly by the family. Of course, they had known my friend Pat and his family for many years, because Pat's parents were very, very Francophile, very Francophile. Both of them spoke fluent French. And probably the oldest Frenchman I met there at the chateau was the grandfather who had fought in the Second World War. And all he could ever talk about was how brave the British soldiers were. That's all he ever talked about. There was absolutely no antipathy at all. Quite the converse.
So do you think
and with the younger French people too, the ones who were the same age as I was then, doing the same job as I was doing. So I met French people of all ages. And when we went down to Saint-Jean-de-Luz, where many of these younger people lived and traveled to do the grape picking each year, they were just wonderful to us. And it's a Basque area, it's a big rugby area. Now, I didn't want to interrupt Doug, when he was with us the other day, he played rugby down there.
Yeah.
And he must have had a whale of a time.
Oh, completely. He's got great stories about.
Yeah.
The
I mean, they are rugby mad. They're bonkers.
Yeah.
They also play a really weird game called Pelota.
Yeah.
And Pelota, and I went to one of these Pelota games, and you're in this like vault-like structure with seats at the top, and it's like a strange sort of narrow squash court.
And
the players have like baskets on their hands.
They're curved, aren't they?
They are. They're curved. And they zip this ball around really quickly.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of local culture. And in those days, they did wear berets.
So do you think that what our king has done by way of his charm offensive fits in with the experiences of British and French ordinary people meeting together? Do you think that sense of simmering resentment, and in particularly post-Brexit, of course, do you think that that's a false picture, and in fact everything is fine and dandy between us?
No, I don't think it is fine and dandy collectively, politically. I think it's a good move what Charles has done, because at the end of the day, it's the aristocracy that run the country.
Yeah.
I don't think the common Frenchman would mind, because my experiences were all on a one-to-one basis. So the fact that I was treated very well and made very welcome wherever I went is not, I don't think that's a litmus test for the whole of France. And it was 30 odd years ago, as you say.
Do you think there's a difference in France between the attitude of the Parisians and the attitude of people who are in more rural locations to that issue?
In more rural locations, undoubtedly. I mean, the sad drain from the rural areas in France to the cities is really tragic. There are whole swathes of French countryside. This is why Brits, particularly down in like the Dordogne where my friend works and places like that, even now you can pick up a chateau for a song, a farmhouse for a song.
Yeah, I think we forget that, of course, it's a very much more significantly larger country than the United Kingdom.
Yes. It's vast. It really is.
And it does have areas that, where I suppose, what you might call rural poverty has just driven people away.
Yes, because there are no jobs, or there is no work that suits the younger people. I mean, even the wine producing industries, it's all cooperatives now.
Yes.
Whereas when I went to France, it was individual chateaus more than cooperatives. Cooperatives was rather a dirty word in those days.
I suppose the cooperative is a means of lowering overheads and costs because you're
absolutely
pooling your resources in.
Absolutely, and pooling different types of grape grown in different regions.
Yeah.
But I mean, to give you an example of how vast France is, my mate lives in a little village called Monestier, and it's in the Bergerac area. Bergerac itself is not a very big town, actually. But Pat lives in this outside this little village called Monestier, and it is so remote there that his life, his wife's life, his kids' lives, the neighbours' lives, nothing was touched by COVID. There was not one case of COVID. They didn't vaccinate. I mean, they could have done, but there was just, he said, nothing's changed, Phil. We don't have to stay in. I go to work. Nothing changed throughout COVID. And that's how vast that country is.
Yeah. So tell us, Phil, what's your favourite French dish?
Oh, my favourite dish for flavour, not as opposed to what it does to my body, is bouillabaisse.
And just explain to us what that is. I know what it is because I make it myself sometimes.
Well, I'm loath for me to describe what you not only do, you actually cook it, don't you? It's a seafood casserole, basically, isn't it?
It's a seafood casserole. So, well, it's seafood sort of soup.
Yes.
Albeit it's thick, and then typically you have toasted baguette, slices of baguette, and you have you make a little sauce to put on the baguette, a riz, which is a sort of garlicky sauce, and so you float that on top of your bouillabaisse and eat away. And I have to say, it's probably my favourite dish.
Yes, well, I suspected it because I know that you make it, and I know your family love it. Yeah. And I know when you holiday in Dunbar, one of the first things you do is you go down to the fresh fish shop and you select your ingredients for your bouillabaisse. And it always makes my mouth water.
I'm going to tell you this. I'm careful when I go into either the harbour or the fish shop to get the fish. I don't call it that because they're going to think I'm a pretentious Englishman. So I just say I want to make some fish stew.
I think in Scotland, the phrase pretentious Englishman is a tautology, isn't it?
You may be right. You may be right. Of course, what it's all that we ought to touch on that of course, historically for many years, not only were the English in conflict with France, but the Scots were very much on the French side.
Oh, goodness. You've reminded me now. That was known as the Auld Alliance.
Absolutely.
And oh no, the Scots and the French, very much like that. Very much like that. And yeah, the Scotland in its own way helped the anti-English causes, both religious and political, whenever they could.
Yeah, for example, Bonnie Prince Charlie spent a lot of his life in France.
Yes. Well, as did Mary Queen of Scots was essentially a French woman.
Exactly that. She spoke French as her first language.
Yeah, she did.
She wasn't really a Scots person at all. I suppose things may have been more fluid then. I don't know. How is your French, Phil?
Oh, these days it's very, very rusty. I mean, when I came back from those 3 years on the Vendage, as it's called, I was fluent in a working class French speaking way. And I learned that I had to be very careful because obviously I've picked up some slang and some profanities. And there was one time when I was with Jackie, we holidayed in the Carcassonne area with some friends of hers. And we went to a rather posh restaurant. And I offended the waiter massively. And I could tell, because I obviously used very basic French that was rather beneath him when I was choosing my food. And he didn't speak to me for the rest of the meal. He spoke to everybody else. But I really cheesed him off with my very basic French. But now...
No. You fromaged him off.
Oh, I'll tell you this story. This one I remember. Oh, yeah, Jackie will remember this. Completely different place where we went. Different time. We went to this restaurant that had been recommended to us. And it had the menu de dégustation, which, as you both know, is a sampler menu. So your meal is like a tapas, if you like. And I was doing my best with Jackie's help to be very French about it. But on this menu was the word lot, L-O-T-T-E. Now, I had no idea what lot was. And I'd been struggling to what was a very patient, well, actually, he wasn't just the waiter, he was the co-owner. And I was struggling along in French trying to do this, and he was being very patient with me. And I turned to Jackie and said in English, "What is lot?" He said, "Monkfish." And it turned out he was a Scotsman. He was a gay Scotsman, shacked up with his personal and business French partner. No, it's just funny it got to the point in my latter visits to France, I just didn't bother because everybody was speaking English.
Yeah.
If you went into the shops, even in remote parts, and in the 80s, this was unheard of. Nobody could speak English where I went. You had to speak French and do your best to understand it. You simply had to, or you wouldn't get anywhere. Anyway, there we are.
Keith, I don't know what your views are.
While you're talking about favourite foods, I think the French do that tripe beautifully. That is my favourite French meal, tripe. And they cook it in a way where you would think that it's little strips of French beef. But the last time I had it, I was filming with a crew in Paris. And we got the okay for the manager to go in and do some filming while we were eating. But the moment we sat down and the cameraman pulled out his camera, half the restaurant left.
How interesting.
In couples.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think we've done our time, haven't we, as it were?
We haven't done too badly.
Yes,
We've done 38 minutes. You got a little bit longer if you wish, because it's fascinating chat. But the other thing that I like about French cooking is I think the last time I took my family away, we went to the Dordogne Valley. And on driving back to Dieppe, we went up and we just deliberately went off the road and into one of these little villages, which only had one restaurant. And it was in the back of the bar. And it only had one course. But the course came with a litre of wine. And it was whatever the lady of the house had decided to cook for that day. And it was quite superb. I can't remember exactly what it was. But before we had finished, the mayor of this little town came in and sat and talked to us. Half the population came in. The word went out, there were strangers, there were foreigners in the restaurant. And we had a marvellous time.
Now, you see, that is what has disappeared, really, sadly. The what you just described was the reality of France. There was always the little village. There was always the little restaurant. There was always the relay bars and restaurants for the lorry drivers that people would eat in anyway. Always. You could always pull off the road and find a hotel for the night. That has all changed, sadly. It's all changed. And of course, what you're describing with that lady of the house, that's the basis of the plat du jour, the dish of the day. That's its origin. Yeah, you eat what they made. And it was a wonderful experience when you could find somewhere like that. But my recent trips, they've died a death.
You're right.
Sadly.
Yeah. When I was 21, I had a French girlfriend, and I went reputed to be the very best food in France. And years later, when I took my wife and my grandsons, I insisted we went to Cahors so I could relive this experience. And the food was nowhere near as good, and the atmosphere was nowhere near as good. It all become very touristy and commercialized.
Yes, well,
and you didn't have your girlfriend with you either, Keith. Let's be fair.
No, I made sure that she wasn't there when I took my wife.
Always awkward. Pull up a chair. Yeah, we'll have a table for three.
Well, there's your classic difference between your Frenchman and your Englishman. The Frenchman would have had his mistress next to the wife.
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
De rigueur.
I have to say, if I can bring a little bit of a spice into the talk about food, I'm not quite sure what the name of the novel was. It's a famous novel, and it was about the student riots in France. I read it here when I was about 23 or 24, so it's quite a long time ago. But the author describes how he would break off for lunch with his mistress, who would actually cook it in her underwear. And the whole image, I must say, enhanced the idea of lunch in Paris very nicely.
Keith, when you say she cooked it in her underwear, that is potentially slightly ambiguous, if you see what I mean. Was she in her underwear when she was cooking it, or did she put it in her underwear to cook it?
I think the former, that I could have misread the passage.
You've had a glimpse there, viewers, of the perverted mind possessed by Mr. Richard Barton. Only he could conceive of a woman cooking food in her knickers. But there we are, each to his own.
Well, you know, when I opened my new restaurant in Lewes, which is based upon that, then it's going to be called Knickerbocker Glory. Then I will invite you along.
Oh, to the opening, please.
Well,
Yeah.
Again, Philip, potentially ambiguous. But there we go.
Yeah, touche, Richard. This is meant to be a before the watershed program.
Certainly.
Shall we say farewell?
If I could get back just to the food again, I spent Christmas, I think it would be 1960 or 61, in Nantes. I think it's in the Loire Valley, isn't it?
Yes.
And I was with the family, and they had pot au feu. And that's always been a very favourite dish of mine as well. I think pot au feu is a great invention, even though it's fairly simple.
Yes.
It's a great shame, actually, that my father-in-law, who is also called Douglas, isn't alive to be part of this programme, because in those years that you are talking about, he would drive Jackie and the family to the south of France and back. And he would love it, because he loved driving. It was the old French roads. There was precious little traffic, and they had a wonderful time just driving around. But anyway, he's no longer with us, so there we are.
Right. Are we winding up, Keith?
Well, it's been another great hour of chat and experience and fun. Thank you, gentlemen. I think the Crown Court has a lot to be said for it if it's producing raconteurs such as yourselves.
It's not the Crown Court that's produced us.
That's what you speak to.
I think they broke the mould when we were produced. But
yes, I think it's the licensed premises of Lewis that's produced us. But there we go.
Keith, are you going to replace your computer?
Yes, it went to AWOL yesterday, and this is the best I could do for today.
Of course.
On the weekend, we'll sit down. We've got a new expert, or somebody who knows rather more about it than I do, and I should be talking to him about what we get and how we do it. One thing that we have now got is the dongle, which works admirably and makes sure that the picture stays pretty good. But at the moment, it's the limitations of this computer, which is a stand-in, is the first reserve off the bench. And it hasn't been to rehearsals recently.
Okay, well, all being well, see you Monday.
Yep, definitely.
Indeed, and you have got you've got some thoughts about touring Northern Ireland.
Well, yes. Richard doesn't know about this, but as you know, I have been following up to and including today Radio 3's journey via the lochs of Northern Ireland, from the Irish Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. And I've made you aware of this. And I had the idea that you and I, just going solo, could chat about what I've learned about those areas and your memories of Northern Ireland. That's the idea.
Why don't you aim for that for Monday?
Well, would you like to be part of that?
Well, if I can, if I can be, I will be. But as I've said to you before, I'm not retired yet.
Yes, you keep saying that. It's very annoying.
It is. Well, it's even more annoying not being retired, I tell you. So why don't you pencil that in for Monday?
Well, what I was going to suggest to Keith, Richard, was if you are available and want to do the two of us, fine. If not, my Irish thing can be a default position.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Is that okay with you, Keith? So if Richard isn't available on any time...
I'm totally happy. I have noticed Philip, that you have your teeth into being an interviewer, which is, I suppose, that comes from you being a barrister for so many years. But I am very happy to add a program in which you would interview various people. And I did actually say that in a note to you. So think about it.
No, of course I think about everything you say. Yes, I can, I think, interview people just as Richard would and could. My problem is I'm the most remote of all three of us, and I have no idea who to ask. I'll think about it. Okay, so I'll see you Monday, Keith.
If the three of us put our heads together, yes, indeed. But if the three of us put our heads together, I don't think that we would have any difficulty in finding people for you to interview. It's just a question of whether you've got the time.
Well, because I am retired, I've got the time. I do have, believe it or not, some quite. Well, I do have it, believe it or not. Barton isn't my only friend. I do have other far more interesting friends, actually. So I'll have a think about them. Richard, you've gone quiet.
I was just thinking about.
In the meantime, these are holding.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I was contemplating, Philip, whether it's right to call a community psychiatric nurse a friend, which is, I think, what you've just done.
Well, my CPN is non-binary, so I have to call them they.
Yeah, I also understand it's in fact a Labrador dog. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know how you knew that, but yes, you're right.
I counted the legs. It was,
How is Jed?
He's very well. Yes, thank you. He's just sitting in the corner, and I'm not on in court until 12, and so I've got time to take him out in the sunshine.
Well, let's let you do that, and hopefully in that Macbethian way of ours, we'll three meet again on Monday.
Yep, lovely. Lovely. Yep, good to see you.
Well, it is sad that we're on the reserve computer, because obviously there was some difficulty in part of that program this morning, which we didn't have the best form of technology going for us. But sometimes what actually doesn't show up on our screen in the studio or in the bar it ignores it, and it's okay at home. So I hope that it was okay at home. Anyway, we will have Melissa Conti in a short period of time. So I'll say toodle pip now, and see you in 5 or 10 minutes. Toodle pip.